This is Mike Lyndhurst, president of the American Adjuster Association, along with Scott Green and John Wood and Matt Behrens. Everyone, the reason that we wanted to do this Facebook Live was really just to kind of clarify what AAA is, the American Adjuster Association, and kind of why this whole thing started, and what kind of mission we're on. And it's a very interesting day because in a couple hours there's a very, very strong hurricane that's going to be bearing down on Louisiana and Texas. I know that a lot of you are probably glued to your computers right now, waiting to see where this thing's going to make landfall and what the implications of that are. Texas is going to be a topic of conversation for those reasons tonight, and it's actually going to help frame some of the priorities of the American Adjuster Association, where we can actually talk about some of the licensure laws. We're really fortunate to have John Wood, who his firm, Green, Klein, and Wood, is actually out of Houston. So they're getting it right on their doorstep right now. So John has actually, he's one of our state board advisors in Texas. Scott Green is the national board advisor out of the Chicago market. It's going to be very interesting to kind of draw some of the distinctions between those two markets because they are very different. And for those of you who don't know who Matt and I are, we are the president and vice president of C3 Group, national public adjusting firm. And here we go. We started the American Adjuster Association in January this year. The main priorities for what we're looking to accomplish include fair and balanced claim situations between consumers and insurance companies, and namely the balance between the costs that are associated with adjusting a claim and investigating a claim. And related to that topic, I think that everybody knows that when you file an insurance claim and you pay your premiums, the insurance company pays the insurance company's adjuster, and they'll pay the insurance company's engineers and third-party administrators, and they'll pay for their defense attorneys, sometimes to make our lives very difficult. So, but there are certain states where if folks like us have to get involved, whether it's a public adjuster, whether it's another building consultant, subject matter expert, plaintiff attorney, it's a very real consequential cost to consumers, to construction companies. And I've always wondered why it was that in most states there's absolutely no way to really recover those very real costs that can get imposed on consumers, if not for the initial underpayment from the insurance company. It's never seemed fair to me. It seems like it's one of these things that just hasn't been settled. And there's a number of trade organizations that are out there that have worked in the public adjusting space. The largest and most well-known is NAPIA. One of their offshoots is TAPIA, who actually John's father used to be the president of. There are associations for attorneys, like the Trial Attorneys Association, state by state. There's APIA, the AAPIA, who has done a good job alongside NAPIA in furthering public adjuster licensing. But that has also come without the balance of having insurance company adjuster licensing. And we're going to talk a lot about that. I'll kind of take segment 2 in that regard. So, and just as a quick snapshot, there are now 47 states that license public adjusters, and there are only, I think, 12 now that license insurance company adjusters. And there's all kinds of imbalances in the definitions between what constitutes one or the other, which creates all kinds of market failures and problems for consumers, for roofers, for attorneys. So, but what I would like to start off with is kind of segueing this over to John. And John, I think that the main priority of, when you and I started talking about this, and Matt, you and I started talking about this, and Scott, we were contemplating this idea of the recovery of compensatory or consequential damages related to the ability for consumers to shift that liability, if you will, or that cost basis of having to hire a PA or an engineer or go through an appraisal process. And we all know, we know, the four of us know the real effects, the practical effects of what happens during these cases because of that issue. And John, you brought up to me and did a great job of framing this on the American Contractor Show a couple of weeks ago about how far back this concept goes into English common law from the 1800s. And it was really interesting when I read it, and I'd love for you to tell the audience about the Hadley versus Baxendale issues and why this is not a novel concept. Why is this not a novel concept?
I think John even went to the 1500s in that, didn't
he? That's correct. I went back even further than the 1800s. This notion has a long pedigree within it goes beyond English common law. It's really part of Western civilization that legal scholars have recognized the doctrine of consequential damages. Sure, yeah. So the notion that the non-breaching party is entitled to consequential damages is not new. In fact, the most influential case in the United States common law originated in England in a case called Hadley versus Baxendale, but the doctrine goes back even further than that into Western civilization. Some legal scholars note the principle was articulated in a legal treatise dating back to 1546 AD, and the key issue is that the damages must be foreseeable. And if they are foreseeable, then the breaching party is liable for them. So the question for us is whether the public adjuster's fee is a foreseeable consequence of the insurance company's breach of the insurance policy.
So John, the word foreseeable is such a great trigger for this whole thing, because this is why when we started kind of contemplating what a draft legislation to make a real change in this would look like, I went back in my mind and said, look, we will concede that there are times that an insurance company may pay a claim correctly. So I don't think that it should just be an automatic that they pay PA fees or engineer fees or appraisal or any of the, we have to concede that there are times that insurance companies will pay a claim the right way. And I think it does happen a good percentage of the time. But if it's foreseeable, that means the trigger is they have underpaid the claim. And every time that we get involved with the claim, it's affirmed. It's not just foreseeable. It is actually a consequence of the fact that they initially underpaid the claim. And then, of course, costs kick in. You get a percentage for a PA. An attorney gets a forced lawsuit. You have to pay a lawyer's fee. So the foreseeable piece of this to me jumped out, and I said, well, it's not just foreseeable; it's incurred. It's a consequence of their doing a bad adjustment. So
that's right. So the law of contracts would imply that the insured is entitled to recover their public adjuster's fee in any event when the carrier breached through delaying, denying, underpaying the loss. If the carrier's behavior, if their misconduct forced the policyholder to retain professional services, then that is a consequential damage. And the question is whether it is foreseeable. And I don't think any insurance carrier lobby can, with a straight face, say, oh, I had no idea when we underpaid this claim, they were going to go hire a professional to help them. Of course they knew that happened. In fact, they were part of lobbying to create the licensing regime that created the profession of public adjusters, and they're well aware of the tort lawyers out there, and it's already the law in Texas, at least, that the non-breaching party is entitled to recover their attorney's fees. And the practice of public adjusting is a carve-out of the practice of law, and so the non-breaching party to an insurance claim should also, and that would be the policyholder here, should also be entitled to recover their professional fees. It simply follows as a matter of logic from legal doctrines that have been around for centuries.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to hammer home here, because I've talked to some people who are influencers that are in the know, people that have been in the industry, that have had places in the political world. And I bring this up to them, and sometimes I get a very defeatist mentality about this, like, the insurance company or they're so powerful, this will never happen, right? And of course, every session, every time that a legislative session happens, you see anti-consumer or anti-insurance company type of bills pop up that are very pro-consumer, and this has happened, it happens every year. So when you think about this, I put myself in that frame of mind of I've talked to legislators before, I've talked to lobbyists before, and what am I expecting to hear back? What I'm expecting to hear back is, well, this is going to increase premiums, which is the boilerplate excuse from insurance companies. This is actually going to be bad for consumers if they can deflect these fees back to the carrier. And it's such a dichotomy when you hear that, but the defeatist mentality of, well, this is never going to happen. You're going to get so much pushback. And I don't know that I believe that to be true. I think that the legislative arena is tricky. There's no doubt. But there are certain states where, we believe that this will actually go over very, very well. And, I think that what we've seen in states like Colorado, where Matt and I have headquarters for our business, where we started our business, where Matt still lives, you have a situation where you have such a strong, Democratic majority in the Senate and the House, and they're aligned, with these ideals politically that they want to help the consumer, and that they're not as aligned with the monetary interest from insurance companies. Now, of course, John, in Texas, we have a little bit of a different legislative complexion. So I've got a lot of.
Even then, Texas has passed a Prompt Payment of Claims Act, adding a penalty interest for failure to pay the claims on a timely basis. Even Texas, as conservative as it is, and I'm from there, they have a very strong tort reform. It's a relatively conservative state, and yet they have passed a Deceptive Trade Practices Act to protect Texas consumers. They have passed an Unfair Claims Settlement Practices Act to protect insurance consumers specifically. And again, this is not a novel legal concept that's not priced into how carriers run their business. For centuries, the breaching party has had to pay the consequences of their misconduct in a contract litigation. And as a matter of course, when my law firm is involved in litigation over these claims and a PA has worked on the file before we got involved, and that PA was involved after a breach or an underpayment, so as a consequence of the breach, we asked the court to award the PA's fees as consequential damages. So all we're trying to do here is to make that automatic. It should be automatic. It should be ensconced in the insurance code of all these states because it's already a right that the victims have. So I see no reason why it shouldn't be automatic.
So, John, I think it's just a really fair point to point out that, the Deceptive Trade Practices Act and some of the pro-consumer things that have happened in a really challenging, political environment like you have in Texas for consumers. And to that end, I'm going to bounce this over to Scott because, I'm not picking on Democrats and Republicans and their priorities because, boy, when you get over into the Northeast states and you get into Illinois, well, Illinois has been controlled by Democrats for forever, just like New York, where I initially grew up. And, Scott, I think this is a good time to talk to you about just how important this is to consumers in Illinois, because in Illinois, you don't have any kind of real, consequential damage recovery. There's no real practical way to get bad faith damages. And what happens is if the carrier just simply decides to make the client sue, good luck. You're never getting 100% of your money there. Why don't you explain, as a plaintiff attorney in Illinois, this is kind of where you started your career, where you still are. Tell everybody about how important this is for people that live in Illinois.
We kind of have the perfect storm here of, a historically corrupt political system with a state that is the home of, you have Allstate, State Farm, Country, and they wield as much power as you would expect that they would in a state like this. And what we also have, obviously, is, one of the three largest cities in the country with sprawling suburbs, and we have storms that, while they don't produce the type of, hail that we see in Colorado or Texas, and we don't get as frequent tornadoes and things like that, we get consistently severe weather, and all of this leads to who is getting hurt the most by the things that we're talking about. In Illinois, we see that it, like in most situations like this, it's the little guy. It's not the big commercial property owner. It's not the the condominium associations. It's individual residential owners who are, for the most part, are insured with State Farm, Allstate, Country, and they're underinsured as it is. They have policies that have significant coverage gaps in them as is, and they are the ones who, when you have these storms come through, they're the ones who are getting hurt the most by the things that we've been talking about. And they're the ones who, when they reach out to me and they say, what do I do? I went and hired a roofer. They referred me to a public adjuster. The public adjuster tried what they could with the insurance company. But at the end of the day, they're not willing to pay enough for me to get my roof fixed. And they call me, and I have to tell them what I just told you guys, which is we're in the worst state, one of the worst states when it comes to this, because I have very little leverage to hold them accountable, because they know that it's not practical for me to go file a lawsuit on that type of claim, because I can't get attorney's fees. I certainly can't get public adjuster's fees as consequential damages, because the law in this state is such that the most that you can get if you prove that the insurance company delayed or underpaid the claim is $60,000 at most, plus attorney's fees and costs. And the reality is that those are never awarded, because the law in this state is that as long as the insurance company can prove that you had a bona fide dispute of coverage, you don't get those. You don't even get past a basic motion to dismiss on those types of damages. So we are certainly up against it here. I'm right now in this state, the thing that I'm fighting for, at least in the legal system, because what we're talking about is a statutory change, but we're just trying to get the appraisal process to be fair for residential policyholders in Illinois, because right now what you have is take State Farm, for instance. State Farm, while they still have an appraisal clause in their policy, they basically have a blanket. We know this to be true. They have a blanket in-house policy right now that they're not going to go to appraisal on any storm claims at all. And basically, in Illinois, not only that, you can have a 1-year suit limitation provision in a residential insurance policy here. So the deck is fully stacked against policyholders here, particularly residential ones. And that's why the mission here would be so meaningful in a state like this. And certainly we have a huge, it'd be a huge mountain to climb here, given what we're up against, with State Farm and Allstate on the other side. But Mike, we made some inroads earlier this year, as far as a bill that they were trying to pass here that would have essentially given the insurance companies, I believe it was a 5-day review period on public adjusting contracts, and during which time public adjusters had to sit there and they couldn't assist the policyholder at all until they it was essentially going to give the insurance companies carte blanche to settle out claims pennies on the dollar and cut the PA out of the whole process. We were able to, through our efforts with a lobbyist, defeat that bill. And so there's some promise there. It's just going to take a big type of movement here to make that type of legislative change.
Well, and Scott, so what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no recourse for consumers in Illinois. And by the way, I live in a state where it's like that too. I live in North Carolina, and talk about the lack of fairness. You have a claim. The insurance company not only stacks the deck in using your premium dollars, right, to pay for their adjuster, to pay for their defense attorneys, to pay for their lobbyists, to pay for all these things. And there's no option. There's no pragmatic option. Say you have a claim that's less than $50,000 or $100,000, and just that subset is virtually every claim in the state. So if you have a hailstorm, you have a wind claim, you have a small fire, I mean, come on, there's nothing you can do. It's so absurd that and if we don't have a seat at the table, and if we don't have people at the state house that are actually talking to the stakeholders, which right now we did with Dan Schoen, but if you're in Chicago and you think that you are this close to being put out of business, you're right. If you're a public adjuster, if you're a roofer, if you are an attorney, you are this close to the bandsaw. So, I would encourage you to jump on board, help us out, make sure that we have enough of a budget in that state where we can at least have somebody in the state house to create a defensive effort. We funded it just personally last year. We were able to get some movement and defeat a really bad bill. But focusing on consumers, there is no recourse there. That's absurd. So,
Yeah.
Matt, I mean, so.
That makes it very
Well,
hard
yeah,
to
they
survive
can
as a
stack the
roofer.
deck. Yeah, they stack the deck with experts. They know that you don't have access to the same experts. They've locked most of them up. They have the money to spend on that. And they know that most public adjusters and attorneys aren't going to touch claims that are that size. So, I mean, it really leaves this deficiency in the marketplace, and that's what we're trying to accomplish with this.
100%. So, if there's people that are listening to this that are thinking, it's just not going to happen. I will tell you, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're not at the table at all. And today, nobody is taking this consumer focus. There's a major market failure specifically in every single state as far as the law of diminishing returns is concerned on these consumer residential claims. And as public adjusters and attorneys, we can really only consider from an economic standpoint taking the largest claims that are possible. Well, if we could simply take an underpaid claim and then shift our fees back to the carrier, if not for their initial failure to adjust it, it would solve that market failure. And that was kind of where this started. This thought process of what's fair? What can we talk to a legislator about? What can we talk to a lobbyist about? I mean, heck, what can I talk to an insurance company adjuster about? The guys on the carrier side, a lot of them that we talk to that are independent adjusters, they support this too because they see what happens in the marketplace. And if consumers can't get help at all, there is no fairness, none, zero balance, zero fairness. And in some states, it's really bad. So,
Mike, I want to tie this into something that John Hotelling has done a great job educating the marketplace about, and those are the so-called badger traps, where any kind of discrepancy in what's being incurred and what's being represented to the insurance company between the payment of the ACV check and the remittance of the RCV, the depreciation holdback, that is being trumped up into felony insurance fraud allegations by the insurance company. And the fact that the insured has to pay 10% of their ACV check to the PA, and then they go back to the roofer and say, okay, this is all I have right now, what can you do? And the roofer tries to make some concession, and no good deed goes unpunished. If they make a concession and then go back to the carrier to get the withheld depreciated amount, now there's a discrepancy, and that will be used as a cudgel against the policyholder. So if you are in the audience, if you're paying any attention to those badger traps, what we're talking about here, it wouldn't necessarily fix those, but it would lessen the risk of falling into one of those traps. Because if your insured is actually being made whole, they're not asking for a discount between the payment of the ACV and the payment of the RCV holdback, and that asking for the discount to make up for this the imbalance and inequity in the fees is where those traps come from. So these issues are connected, and I would encourage you, if you're listening, to understand the enlightened self-interest that we are trying to appeal to here. If you protect the policyholders, you will protect your own bottom line. And so there's an ultimate alignment of incentives, whether you're a restoration contractor or a PA, or even like me, if you're an attorney like me, this is a larger damages model for your files. You should support that. You're trying to make your client whole again. So I see this as a great unifying force.
We might have lost John. Hey, Mike, so there was a question that came in from Kyle Larson. It says, Mike, we are looking to include, or are we looking to include appraisal costs as well? Let's address that.
So Kyle is also one of our members, and Kyle, thank you for joining up with us. It's a really good question. I think that if the carrier is going to demand appraisal and the policyholder has to comply, I could see a real path to asking for that, because if they don't demand it, that they would never have to incur that cost. And then, of course, if the claim goes way up in appraisal, why should they have to pay that? The only challenge with that is the fact that the policy specifically says that, the carrier has to pay their appraiser, and the consumer has to pay their appraiser, and then they split the umpire costs. And you know what? In that situation, to me, fair is fair. But again, if the carrier demands it like they do in Texas all the time, and I will tell you that in Texas, it's an interesting situation because they have certain protections for bad faith if they participate and pay an appraisal award. So they can kick the can down the road there. They can demand appraisal. They can impose these expenses on the client, on the consumer, and they're doing it for their own self-interest to protect themselves from additional damages above and beyond the breach of contract. So, John, are you back?
Yes.
Can you hear us? Okay.
Yes, I can.
I think you might have. Okay. So, okay, great. So, yeah, why don't you talk to Kyle Larson, who is in Colorado? He's been a roofing expert for a long time, and it's a really interesting question. The consequential damage models surrounding appraisal fees and umpire fees. It is. I mean, there's a conflict there, I think, with standard ISO policies, but in a place like Texas, where they weaponize appraisal demands from the carrier to the consumer. I mean, what's your thought on that?
Well, I think they're weaponizing it in other states as well. I think Colorado is seeing that play out right now. I'm sure there's a handful of you that have had your clients sued after the payment of an appraisal award to you in Colorado, and now the defense bar is suing and alleging bias and to seek to set aside those appraisal awards by alleging some sort of impropriety in the appraisal process because of what is probably unfortunate case law in that state. And so I think there's several scenarios where an insurance company doesn't want to pay everything out. They invoke appraisal as a shield to try and insulate themselves from extra contractual liability. And then after the appraisal award is rendered, they'll pay it and then sue the insured to get it back. All of this is abusive. Okay, all of this is abusive. And if a law firm were to get engaged after that under those facts, they should seek to recover those appraisal costs and half the umpire fee as well, because that's essentially what's causing the insureds to incur those costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the words here, the important, the predicating factor to what we're suggesting here is if not for the initial underpayment.
Right.
All they got to do to fix all this is just pay the stinking claims the right way, right? I mean, otherwise, the rest of this is off the table. We're not even talking about this unless there's initial underpayment on the claim. But in the case that there is an initial underpayment and then there's the incurring of additional costs to get the money that actually was owed in the first place, that's what we're talking about here. So, similar to the prevailing party statutes for fee shifting for attorneys. So, Scott, maybe you want to talk about the difference between Illinois and, say, the Florida 627428 prevailing party statute in Florida and how that works for attorneys, because that kind of sets a similar precedence. When you read the fee shifting statute in Florida, it addresses attorneys' fees, but it doesn't cover the reasonable costs that are also associated with that litigation. And I think that's a really important distinction to make.
Well, and those reasonable costs, obviously, we always have to hire, experts when we get these cases into court, and sometimes even before, right? And, those need to be included because obviously, what good is it for an insured to go hire an attorney if I can't hire an expert and have them go up against whatever expert the insurance company hired, like Matt was talking about earlier. It's most of the firms that do these types of claims at some point get linked up with these carriers, and they do repeat work for them. So we have to go out and we have to find our own experts. And sometimes, at least for me in Illinois, what Matt was talking about was such a problem here that most of the engineering firms that I have to use here in Illinois are coming from Florida, they're coming from Nebraska, they're coming from all over the country, but they're not here in Illinois because if they're here in Illinois, they're most likely conflicted out. So that only increases the cost to my client because I can't just have somebody come in from, the suburbs to look at a building in Chicago. I have to fly somebody in, and imagine what that's like now with our current circumstances, how difficult that is. So it only leads to further delay. And I've even gone, I'll even suggest to carriers, hey, look, I know you've worked with such and such expert before in the past. They're reasonable. I'd be willing to have that person come out and give a second opinion, but obviously I've never been taken up on that offer before. So, those are just significant costs. And honestly, those are the costs at the end that are some of the hardest for the insured to swallow, because they look at this as, why do we have to hire somebody to prove something that should be so obvious, right? And why do we even need an engineer when we're talking about things like roofing and what the cost to rebuild a residential property is? Well, why do we need to spend all this money for somebody who just has some letters at the end of their name when they really have no idea in the first place how to do this type of work? And it's because, unfortunately, if the insurance company is going to hire that engineer and we have to go into court, that's what carries weight in court, unfortunately. And it's a sad reality. And so those costs are essential on top of attorney's fees, that we be able to recoup those. It all starts with respect to the appraisal fees. The one thing I did want to add to that is, we do have actually in Illinois, it's codified, and the policy, the Illinois endorsements that we have on the policies follow it, that if you ask for an appraisal and you are actually get everything in the appraisal that you were asking for before the appraisal, you actually can get your appraisal fee covered. So those are things, we have little things like that, and I'm sure other states do as well. But that's something that is out there, for people to know. Now, again, that doesn't happen all the time, right? Because what happens if you get 80%, 90%, 95% of what you were asking for before the appraisal? It's no good. So what we're talking about is something, that's really fair, which is, come on, if the insurance company was paying $10,000 and we go to appraisal and we end up with $200,000, even if maybe we were asking for $250 before, you don't think we should get something, to compensate for all that time and money? And really the time, I think, is what, even more so than the money sometimes, how long it takes to do appraisal these days. And you would think that would be a process that would be simple, quick. It's supposed to be alternative dispute resolution, and yet sometimes I have a hard time telling a policyholder that they might get a resolution through the appraisal process quicker than going to litigation. And so these are all issues that are worth fighting for.
Scott, you know what's
and Scott,
go ahead.
Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Well, so what I was going to say, I mean, it kind of goes into a transition of adjuster licensing. Like, we're seeing this massive change in the industry as far as the adjusters that we used to actually negotiate with. It's not their call anymore. They're not licensed. They don't have any personal accountability. They're basically taking the marching orders of the adjusters. The inside adjuster may not even have the decision-making capability on his own. But it's consultants and it's engineers, and they're pushing clients to have to do the same thing. But I think, again, that speaks to the fact that a lot of these IAs that are going out on site, they're not the decision maker anymore.
And neither are the lawyers that represent them, as John knows well. We have great relationships with our defense counsel, I think, for the most part. Unfortunately, they have no say, even though they have an expertise as to what the likelihood of success is going to be if we go to trial, just like an IA really has an expertise in actually having gone on site with their expert or seeing the loss. But they're not the one making the call either. You have the desk adjuster who's answering to the higher ups, and that is a problem that we feel that every day.
They're structured like that to avoid responsibility. It's sort of like, let's create a little Rubik's Cube you have to solve if you want to actually trigger us to do the right thing. You know what I was going to say, Scott? It's really ironic is all these people who lack authority or the training or the qualifications or the knowledge to do the right thing, they're being paid by the policyholder. the premiums that we pay are going to their salaries, and then they go and get paid to go throw the policyholder under the bus and say, I don't see any damage. I mean, it's disgraceful. And so if you're listening to this and this is your job, go sell used cars or something. Stop hurting people. You're hurting consumers. It's willful ignorance. Quit it, or join our cause and help us fix this situation, because the policyholders are already paying your salaries, and then they're having to pay the PA fees, the attorney fees, and all our expert costs just to get the claim resolved properly. And that was on the insurance company in the first place, to actually properly investigate the loss and to pay out onto their contractual liabilities.
Yeah, John, that's a really good segue, because I'm going to get into licensing, and since Texas is on everybody's mind tonight, I'd like to talk about something that's really kind of our secondary priority at AAA here, which is balance in regulations, balance in definitions. And for those of you who are in Texas, you will probably know that the Chapter 4101 governs adjusters that work for insurance companies, and Chapter 4102 covers public adjusters. And talking about the engineers and the third parties that get involved in these cases, this is just very interesting to me. If you look up Texas 4101, you will see that is a 13-page long statute that governs carrier adjusters. The public adjuster statute is 27 pages long. And I want to hit some of the high notes, but how is that possible that we have twice as long of a bill regulating our industry than the people who have a conflict with the policyholder? So, and let me point out some definition issues. I'm not going to share a screen. I'm just going to kind of rattle these off. But simply a carrier adjuster means a person. This is straight from the definition. It's simply someone who investigates or adjusts a loss on behalf of an insurer as an independent contractor or as an employee of an adjustment bureau. That's it. That's the only definition. Very, very simple. It's broad. It's not overly restrictive. And then we get over into the definition of what constitutes a public adjuster. And that is a person for direct, indirect, or other compensation acts on behalf of an insured in negotiating for effecting the settlement of a claim. And there's a longer part of the definition. That's about a third of it. But think about this. This is why we have such a big problem with the UPPA laws right now, because it's this massively broad catch-all statement of if you're doing anything to affect the settlement of a claim, then you have to have a PA license. And of course, like any other licensing laws, you have exemptions. And the exemptions for the insurance company adjusters, and I'm sure everybody here will find this very interesting, but you are exempt from having insurance company adjusting licensure if you are an engineer, an estimator, a photographer, a private detective, a handwriting expert. It's kind of a weird one. Or even a salaried employee of an insurer who is not regularly engaged in the adjustment, investigation, or supervision of insurance claims. So, when you're talking about, a company like HAG or Donan or Rimkus, the well-known, defense engineers that service insurance companies, they are exempt from these laws. Okay, they can't be held out as the unauthorized practice of adjusting, even though we all know that their reports are the ones that the insurance companies rely on implicitly to make coverage decisions. Well, if a public adjuster does the same thing in return and you're not actually a licensed adjuster, you don't have those same exemptions. You have this big catch-all phrase about what constitutes a PA. So, and I want to make sure that I'm making this statement very, very clear about where AAA stands on UPPA. And the four of us have talked about this extensively, and we've hacked this apart a lot. Simply what needs to happen is there just needs to be balanced definitions. Okay, that's it. We just want balanced definitions. We don't want to get rid of public adjuster licensing. So if you're from NAPIA and you're listening to this, if you're listening from the American Association of PAs, and you've heard that our association is trying to allow or to burn down all these licensing laws, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do here is just trying to look at the absurdity of the imbalance in these definitions and why it creates market failures. Why is this bad for consumers? Okay. And especially going back to the residential claims, nobody gets any help there, guys. Nobody. Why? Because The first line of defense is EMS companies, a lot of times roofing companies that are mitigation. Well, now they're being held with this hammer over their head saying, oh, are you negotiating now? Are you affecting the settlement of a claim? And then you do that in a state like Florida and you get thrown in jail for a felony. Well, why is it that Hag and Donin and Rimkus and all these engineering companies that are doing wrong for the policyholder, why are they not getting thrown in jail for felonies?
Mike,
There's a massive imbalance.
I want to speak to that exactly because in Texas, there is a section 101 of the insurance code. Sorry, I'm looking at chapter 101, unauthorized insurance, and section 101 of this act says that it is conduct that constitutes the business of insurance includes directly or indirectly acting as an agent for or otherwise representing or assisting an insurer or person in investigating or adjusting a claim or loss or inspecting a risk. And to do that in Texas without a license authorized by Texas authority is a third-degree felony. So it actually is a crime in Texas to inspect or investigate a loss for an insurer if you're not licensed under the insurance code. The problem is lack of enforcement. It's up to the insurance commissioner to refer this matter to the attorney general to bring charges. And so you've got two layers of insulation. But I just wanted to be clear. The law on the books makes it a felony to do exactly what those engineers are doing, and these turn-down specialists and ladder assists that come out investigating and turning down claims that the carriers end up saying, oh, I'm relying on my boots on the ground, who, as it turns out, is acting in a felonious manner. So we're just trying to raise awareness of that imbalance. And so to go to your original point about where does our organization stand on the unauthorized practice of public adjusting, unlike other organizations, we will not be out there policing contractors for trying to help policyholders. That is not our concern. Okay, if anything, we're going to be highlighting these other bad actors who are hurting consumers in violation of law and seeking to level the playing field.
Well, and I think it does come
that's a
down to
really
definition. Mike made a big point about the definition piece right now because a lot of the carriers are just coming out and saying everything's UPPA. You know, you talk scope and causation or anything like that. A contractor should be able to say, hey, hail fell from the sky. I got a hail trace report from a meteorologist that says I've got 1.5-inch hail here. I see hail damage to the roof. Here's a scope. Here's the codes. Here's how to fix it. Here's my cost. None of that is UPPA. And I think when the carriers are sitting here where there's not good definitions of what UPPA truly is, and they can just willy-nilly say it's anything, it prevents a lot of these contractors who really are the first line of defense in these hail claims and hurricanes and floods and all that to be able to be the experts that they are and saying this is how much it costs and this is the scope of what I have to put back together.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and it was interesting because they've pushed public adjuster regulation for basically the last 20 years, and they've been able to get the laws put in place in 46 states. And last year, I wanted to speak to this too, and I'm okay doing this publicly. We were made aware that they were going to Wisconsin to try to get public adjuster regulation, and we went to the Senate committee hearings and simply said, look, we're okay with public adjuster regulation, but you got to have the same balanced regulation for independent and staff adjusters. And we got so much pushback on this that it was, to me, it was completely absurd. I mean, how is it that you can take the person who has the conflict of interest with the insured and not hold them as responsible as you're going to hold the consumer adjuster? And there was just a lot of defeatist talk like, oh, that's never going to happen and so on. Well, it has happened. Okay, and the laws are not great. They're not balanced. Okay, but it does happen, and you just got to ask for it. Hang on one second.
Yeah, I think we have to have some optimism. If anything, we should know that in this country, anything is possible politically. So you just need to make the case. You need to be persistent. You need to build a broad coalition. You need to have a nationwide membership, and so we're building AAA. We're constituting it from the ground level to do exactly that. We have a broad stakeholder coalition contractors, adjusters, attorneys, forensic investigators, appraisers, all the sorts of ethical leaders from our industry are already part of this. They've already committed to this. They put their money where their mouth is. And I think if we make the case and we have a strong enough coalition that we could actually get some legislation here.
Well, and I got to be honest, guys. I mean, we all see these posts. They're every single day. These issues get brought up on all sorts of different Facebook pages. They'll go hundreds of comments deep, and everybody's complaining about the UPPA issue, that not being defined, the fee shifting, having to basically try to absorb costs, whether it's an engineer or an appraiser or whatever into the cost of doing the work. There's all of these complaints within the industry, and yet, like that's exactly why we're doing this. There was no organization that existed that was really tackling these issues head on. Like ATA has done a great job, but that's focused on one thing. It's not all of these other pillars that we're trying to solve here. So, I mean, my challenge would be if you've been on any of those posts over the last few months or the last few years, and you've partaken in those frustrations and voicing of those complaints, join us. We're doing something about it.
Well, and Matt, let's so just as a quick call to action, people are probably curious about, really what does this cost? What's the commitment if you do want to become a member? And guys, I mean, it's as low as $500 a year. We have a baseline membership. You can break it up month to month as low as $43 a month. And if you're in this industry and plan on making this a career like all of us have, if you're not willing to make that kind of a commitment, there is no basis for complaint when things go haywire in your state. And that's the truth. You have to take some ownership. It's either going to be a time investment or a money investment. And fortunately, you have people that are really good thought leaders that are really influential. And none of us are taking a salary out of this thing. We're not paying ourselves. All the money is coming into the organization to pay for some baseline administrative costs. And then the rest of it's going to lobbyists for state law, to have a seat at the table, to have a presence at the state house, to make sure that bills are being monitored. Because, by the way, I can't tell you the amount of times, including in Chicago, where Scott and I, when we were first getting the organization going, heard about laws that come in that hit a committee, and then all of a sudden the next day you got to mobilize and get out there because you didn't have somebody monitoring the bills that could literally put you out of business. And this is kind of what happened with us in Wisconsin when they were trying to pass the new public adjuster regulation bill. It was the day before that the committee hearings were hitting. So there was a proposed bill, there was a sponsor, there was all this time, all this discussion, and none of us were at the table to have this conversation. So we got blindsided and had to run in there and go, wait a minute, why are you doing this for us and not doing it for the other side? It was just really, really off-putting to me. But even more than that, it brought an awareness that there has to be more of a global effort. There has to be an investment. And if you're in this industry and you're not willing to make an investment, don't believe the insurance companies won't come in there and try to pass laws that will either make your job extremely difficult or they will just put you out of business. So look no further than where I live in North Carolina. You know how many claims I do in North Carolina as a public adjuster? 0, because there is no way that a consumer on a smaller claim, just like in Illinois, could get me to work for them because of the state laws here. That has to change. So, the exemptions in Texas are really, really interesting to me when you look at the differences there. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, and here's another one that I think in Illinois, we have this right now. We're one of the few states where you can actually have a very close tie between a contracting company and a public adjusting firm, such that a contractor can actually go get licensed to be a public adjuster and essentially public adjust a claim that they have an affiliation to as a contractor. And you have the insurance lobby going after this in a really, aggressive way, saying that this is taking advantage of consumers, when really what it's doing is it's allowing consumers to have a contractor who's able to fight for them on some of these issues that otherwise would be considered UPPA. And if in fact they are able to get the claim approved fairly and then they actually go and do the work, it allows the homeowner to avoid the cost of the public adjuster, and it allows them to not have those fees come out of the actual work. And it's actually a huge benefit to consumers here. And the problem is, as always, when you have an insurance lobby going after it, they pick out some of the bad apples and use them as an example and try to make that and extrapolate that into this is all contractors in the industry are like this and they're trying to take advantage.
That's exactly what happened with the Florida assignment of benefits reform. And I feel like it's a very similar situation.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what they were trying to backdoor with the legislation that we were able to defeat earlier this year. They didn't want to go after that directly, and they didn't want to come out and go after because they would have had a much harder time and it would have been a much bigger deal. So they tried to sneak this particular bill through. But that's one of the ways that we can. It's not our primary focus, right? Is being on the defense, like Mike was just talking about. We don't want to sit there and be defending against pro-insurance company legislation that's coming through. We actually want to get and go on offense. But the bigger the bigger of an organization we can become, we can have the ability to do that. And so when those things pop up, we can have lobbyists or people who have their ear to what's going on in the state capitol. And so we can really get ahead of these things and prevent bad legislation from coming down the pipe, while at the same time going on offense as well. And that's, it's just a matter of, membership and funding and whether we have the funds to keep those people on our payroll.
Yep, and Scott, just to give everybody a heads up too, it's not like we haven't done something so far. We do have lobbyists that are actually contracted into AAA. We've got a great administrator by the name of Greg Williams with Red Point Resources. He's been a lobbyist in Colorado for 33 years, since 1987. Our general counsel, who helped us form the organization, his name is Scott Michaeljohn. He's going to be engaged by AAA in Colorado as well. We are very well funded in Colorado on a recurring basis. So we have plenty of money to just in Colorado with just an initial push. We have enough of a budget there to take care of what I think we need to take care of in Colorado. Texas, there are more people in Texas. I mean, if you get 50 contractors at $1,000 a year, I mean, think about that amount of a budget, and you got a consistent presence at the state at the state house there that can actually move the needle. So in the big states where you have a lot of people in this industry, just please, if you're listening to this, take it very, very seriously because, well, I'll tell you, last year in Florida, we saw attack after attack after attack. And there were really only a handful of people there that were actually going to Tallahassee, going to the committee hearings, making some noise, people that were volunteering their time. It needs to be a larger contingent. The more people that are involved in it, the less time you have to put in, and time is the more valuable resource, of course. So, but anyways, I think that we probably have addressed most of the high points. I don't want this to go on for hours and hours, and I know that we've already cut into our dinner hour and everybody else's. Matt, Scott, John, do you guys have anything else to add for now, or any other calls to action or challenges or anything that you might want to throw out there?
Yeah, guys, go to AmericanAdjusterAssociation.org. There's a whole lot more about what we're trying to accomplish. All the pillars on there, a bunch of different information. You can find out everything about the membership side of things. We're just looking for leaders. There's so many of you that are passionate about these issues that want to protect policyholders. Kyle Larson actually just a minute ago said, Mike, you're so right about our lack of a unified front. State Farm, all state farmers, et cetera, all work as one when it comes to legislation. The only way we ever have any seat at that table is to work in unison, PAs, contractors, and attorneys on issues that affect us all. And really, at the end of the day, the policyholder is that issue, and they're the ones that we need to protect. And this organization is about bringing contractors, attorneys, different experts, appraisers, PAs, anybody that is there on behalf of the policyholder. So again, guys, just get involved.
Well, yeah. So I want to ask everybody who's watching this too one very, very simple question, and I want everybody to think about this because this is really what it comes down to. Who do you serve? Okay, who do you serve? Do you serve yourself? Do you serve only your industry? Or do you serve the consumer? Are you a fiduciary? Or are you simply just trying to make a buck? Who comes first? Is it you or is it your client? Okay. And I think that those fundamental questions have been missed by a lot of trade organizations. You see roofing organizations who try to get legislation passed that just benefit roofers. You see PA organizations that only try to get laws passed to benefit PAs. And I think a lot of these organizations have missed the boat because they're not focusing on who they serve. Who does AAA serve? We serve the consumer. Okay, that's it. And by the way, if you serve the consumer, you come second, but you help yourself too. All right. So, Scott, John, anything else to add?
Enlightened self-interest. That's it. This is in our interest. If we don't protect the policyholder, there's no market for us to be working in. So, we just have to be vigilant.
Yeah, jump on board.
Awesome. Scott, Matt, John, always great to see your faces.
You too.
Everybody who tuned into Facebook Live, if you guys are watching this later, I really want to thank you for spending your time listening to us babble about all these fun subjects. And believe me, we're just getting going. This is going to be a lot of fun. By the way, this is an election year, so there's going to be a lot of action coming up after November. Lots of stuff. We're going to do more of these Facebook Lives. We're going to do more updates, live updates, and we're looking forward to more participation. And if you have any questions, you can reach us at either Mike, Matt, Scott, John, or David, who wasn't with us tonight, unfortunately, but those are the 5 board members, 5 board of directors of American Adjusters. So one of those first names, Mike, David, Scott, Matt, or John, at AmericanAdjusterAssociation.org. Signing off. Everybody have a great night.